Okay, our audience continues to grow, and I'm sure we're going to have more that's going to join us, and we will welcome them as they do. But we're going to go ahead and get started because it is 11:05. So again, welcome to Intentional Conversations. This is a virtual community chat that my company, Nika Consulting, puts on, and we have been doing this for the past several weeks, and this has been really the highlight of my week. And so I want to welcome you, whether you're joining by Facebook or whether you're here on Zoom. Again, I will remind those of you who have joined by Facebook, if you want to have the opportunities to be connected and receive notifications, be sure to go to my website, Nika White Consulting. It's actually nikawhite.com. My brand is Nika White Consulting, and at the bottom of the homepage, there are fields that you can fill out to give us your contact information to be added to our distribution list. If you are on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, I encourage you and invite you to connect with me. I would love to interact with you on those platforms, and my information is right there on the screen for you to see. Also, I want to just give you a little bit of information about some of the other resources we provide at Nika White Consulting. So we are a management consulting firm, and we intersect the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion with leadership and business. And that means I travel all over the country, well, prior to COVID-19, but I'll get back there. But I work with a multitude of clients, private, public sector, different industries, different sizes, helping them to integrate into their business frameworks strategic diversity and intentional inclusion. Some of the resources I provide would be direct one-on-one consulting. I have a ton of white papers. I produce a lot of content around this topic for those that are interested in leading inclusively. So check those out. That's just free for the offering to help you grow in your leadership around diversity and inclusion. I also do these small snippet of videos that I release at least once a week, sometimes twice a week, but it's called Inclusion Uncomplicated. It's all about simplifying DEI. And so I encourage you to go to my website, go to my YouTube channel and subscribe. And so you can be exposed to some of that good learning and development around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And if you happen to be in a space where you're interested in training options, especially during this time of COVID, I do offer a lot of custom and pre-recorded video-based virtual training around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Again, I write a lot of content, so my blogs, every single month they are released, and I encourage you to also take advantage of those. And that's actually on the next slide, as well as my online newsletters. And so that's enough about Nika White Consulting. Again, here's my website, nikawhite.com, and you can find much more information out there. But I want to shift and talk about intentional conversations. And so first and foremost, before we get into introducing our fabulous guest co-host for today, I want to put into your hearing information concerning the upcoming weeks. So next week on May 8th, we're going to have Minda Harts as my co-host for Intentional Conversations. And Minda is the author of the memo, What Women of Color Need to Know to Secure the Seat. She is phenomenal. And I will tell you that you're not going to want to miss that conversation next week. And let's also go to the next slide, because I want to share with you that while I'm talking about Minda, we also have a summer book club that Minda and I are partnering on. And of course, her book is the book that we're going to be using. So go get the book now, register for the summer book club. There are actually 3 dates in June where Minda's going to serve as my co-host. And we're going to be talking about aspects of the book. And it's going to be fabulous. And so get the book and then go to her website, download the free workbook, and then register. And we will love to have you on those 3 dates in June. And then next, on May 15th, we have a tremendous guest as well as my co-host. And I'm so excited to welcome Keisha Rivers. She's going to be talking about the topic of Equipped for Change, creating our new normal, right? So that's going to be very relevant. What happens after we've changed from an event? The truth is that no matter how much we want to, we'll never be able to go back to normal. So that's something that we need to start wrapping our heads around now. And so I look forward to that conversation with Keisha Rivers on May 15th as part of our Intentional Conversations. Okay, so now that that is all out of the way, I want to frame our conversations for today by talking a little bit about what this experience is like and why in which we're doing this. And so we are really committed to optimizing this virtual community experience for all. And so what I want you all to do is partner with me in making sure that we are considerate of some key agreements throughout our time together today as we hold space for each other. And so I'll just recap those very quickly. So the first one is, if you go to the next slide, Anna. Okay, so the first one is when not sharing, please remain on mute. I've said that before, but it certainly will just help us to avoid the disruption with background noise. But we will open up the line several times and invite any of you who would like to share, ask questions, or contribute to the conversations to do so. Again, as I mentioned before, you can turn your cameras on. We would love to see your smiling faces, but if not, we're glad to have you participating in an auditory capacity. So it's totally up to you and your comfort level. I will share that we are here to learn with each other and from each other and create a sense of community. Myself nor my co-hosts that I bring on every week will have all of the answers, but we do feel like we may have some perspective and are committed to facilitating dialogue that can lead us to, I think, some really good nuggets that we all can use to propel ourselves to the next level. Although the topics will vary, what connects all of these intentional conversation sessions together is the intersection of diversity, equity, and inclusion, leadership, and business. With that in mind, we certainly are very respectful of what's top of mind for each of us right now as we're in this global pandemic. And so with that being the case, we will relate a lot of our conversations to COVID-19, but not necessarily will that be the focus of our conversations throughout our hour together. And that's intentional because we're already way consumed with COVID information, right? And so our time together today is about providing a path to action through application rather than just simply sharing information. I think it's important for us to be conduits of resources and not just exchange knowledge, but also equip and empower you to be able to leverage some of the information that we're giving you in a practical way. So see this as a dynamic exchange of information and regarding how to lead inclusively and strategies for personal and professional development and growth. Leverage the chat room again for sharing resources, your contact information. I welcome you to put your LinkedIn information there if you like. Let's try to connect with each other even outside of this platform. You can use the chat room to ask your questions and certainly introduce yourselves. And then last but not least, our Zoom sessions are being recorded and they will be shared this afternoon along with a transcript of the chat room conversations, because again, lots of good nuggets and good information is going to be held out there. Now to my guests, without further ado, I'm so excited to welcome Jennifer Tardy. And so today we're going to be talking about ensuring healthy hiring practices. So she's also in a similar space than I'm in, but she focuses very specifically on the topics of recruitment from an organization perspective, as well as working directly with job seekers. And so I'm so excited to have her share with us today. I will give her a formal introduction and then I'll have her just to kind of welcome the group and to get us started. So I'm excited to kick off the month of May with Jennifer Tardy. And this conversation is going to be about bias, how to ensure your hiring practices within your organization are healthy, unbiased, and robust. Jennifer Tardy is CEO of Jennifer Tardy Consulting, JTC, which is a boutique diversity and inclusion consulting organization based in Maryland. Through her leading #career success brand, she trains recruiters on how to implement best practice diversity recruiting programs. She also provides career coaching to job seekers seeking to navigate bias within the hiring process in order to land that great job. JTC's vision is to be a link between individuals in job search and the diversity recruiters seeking to hire them. Jennifer Tardy, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm good. I was intentional this morning about not doing any coaching sessions so that I could show up here energized.
Well, I am so glad. I appreciate you for that. It's so good to see you again. I remember when we met years ago. And we'll have to talk about at some point exactly how we met. I think I remember, but I want to kind of hear your story of it as well. But so just welcome the audience and tell us what we have to look forward to today.
So I'm so excited to see everyone here today, and I see that it keeps getting bigger and bigger with people coming on in. So welcome. Because of the work that I do, meaning in training recruiters and in coaching job seekers, I'm able to kind of translate information between the two groups. And so what I really would love to focus on today are two things. One is the obstacle course of getting a job from both lenses, recruiters who are preserving the obstacle course, and then job seekers who have to navigate the obstacle course to get a job. And then the second thing that I want to talk about has more to do with self-care and mental health. So, Yeah.
Two
Yeah.
extremely important and relevant, timely conversations for today. So I love the fact that you referred to it as an obstacle course. Although I do wonder if sometimes when you use that word, for those that are actually in the midst of trying to land a job, does that become kind of daunting and maybe causes them to have pause and think, can I really do this? Can I really go on that path? And I'm sure you have some great strategies that you're going to share today for us.
Yeah, and that's really, really true, Nika, because I share with people all the time that when I'm coaching, so even when I talk about, I'm coaching job seekers, my audience, I typically have women who are coming to me for coaching, but I'm always thinking about this from the lens of historically underrepresented groups and their experiences. And so I share with people that even though I teach tactics on, how to answer certain questions, I spend a lot of my time helping people to navigate their own emotions, right? So let me give you an example. Yeah. So an example is I may have someone come to me and say, hey, Jennifer, check out my resume. And I'll look at that resume, and then I'll have a conversation with them where we're just talking. Tell me about you. And then I'll take that information, plug it into their resume, and I'll say, here, look at this resume. What do you think about it? And they'll say, wow, who is that person? And then I'm like, that's you. This is exactly who you are. But because we have our own doubts, right, because of the things that we've experienced and the experiences that other people have put on us too, we often don't see ourselves for as qualified and as powerful as we actually are. And so a lot of what I do through coaching is helping people to navigate their own feelings of self-doubt, have courageous conversations, and realize that the hiring process is a two-way street. Just as much as they are assessing you, you should feel comfortable having that seat at the table to be able to assess the employer too, to make sure it's a good fit for you. Yeah.
I love that. And I think so often as job seekers, we tend to feel as though the employer has, the upper hand. And maybe in some respects they do, but I love the fact that you are amplifying the fact that they also are having some decisions to make as well. And so I appreciate that. So let me ask, I would imagine that right now what you're talking about in terms of the mental capacity, the mindset, managing your emotions, as well as going through the proper strategies to land that job, is even more critical where we're in this heightened period of uncertainty, global pandemic. So how have you seen things shift as a result of COVID relevant to prior to COVID?
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm doing now, especially within the groups that I'm talking to, is I'm asking people, or I'm inviting people to have grace with themselves, right? So many people that I talk to, many people who are on this call right now are very ambitious, very goal-driven, and oftentimes we find ourselves carrying the weight of the world. We are the points of contact. We're the center. We're the anchor at our jobs. We're the anchor in our homes. And statistically, when you start thinking about women of color in general, like the world around us would fall down if we fell. And so I share with people that now we're in a different season. Yes, before you carried everything, you carried the load by yourself, but now in this season, I want you to learn to have grace with yourself, no matter what you're doing, even if you're on your job search. And so I'm sharing that with everyone. And so a book that I really, really love is called The 4 Agreements. And if you haven't read it,
I want to pause there because I want somebody to please put that into the chat. We love resources. The 4 Agreements. Okay, who's the author?
And I usually have the book on me, and I can't quite remember.
That's fine.
Someone has read it because that's a very popular book.
Okay. Well, I'm sure Anna and Elvia can find the author and put it into our chat.
Miguel Lewis.
Oh, perfect.
Miguel Lewis, yes.
To the rescue. Thank you.
So it's an easy read, and one of the agreements in particular that really moved me when I first read it was always do your best, right? But it said, but remember that your best changes depending on what you're experiencing in that moment. So your best may look different when you're feeling healthy, right? But your best may be different when you're under the weather or when you're feeling sick, right? So your best during this pandemic may look different, but all of that pressure that we put on ourselves to perform and to show up, we still act like we need to perform and show up the same way we did before the pandemic happened. And
Right.
then but think that the whole dynamic has changed. We have children at home. We have loved ones who are crashing at our home as well too. And so it's noisier around us, and our kids are coming into meetings and things, and we take that pressure and we pile it on ourselves, right? And we're like, wait a minute, I'm still supposed to be perfect. But when I say have a little bit of grace with yourself, recognizing that you're still doing your best. It just looks different in this season. Which, oh, go ahead.
No. I'm applauding this because this is so good. And I love the fact that you use the word grace, because as I talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, often I'll share we need to extend grace to others, and we need to accept grace and assume positive intent of everyone. So I love the fact that you're amplifying that we need to put ourselves in the driver's seat and controlling how in which we will view our performance based upon what we're dealing with at that time. So I see so much application of that, even as a parent. You know, right now I've been having to be a coach to my kids and help them through this pandemic. And I think that you're right. And not only is it something that we have to extend to ourselves in terms of grace, but we need employers to also be extending that same level of grace to their constituents, their associates, because, you know, time out for pulling out the routine performance evaluation that we've done every single year and now sitting down with someone and going through all those criteria. No, we're in a different time right now. So respond to that.
That's right. And especially if you're a manager, right? If you're managing a team of people, they're looking to you and how you're showing up in this period. And if you don't practice self-care and demonstrate that to the team, your team is going to respond through the season the same way that you're demonstrating it, right? So if you're still trying to be Superman or Superwoman in this season, your team is going to show up the same way. And it's really important because when I was in corporate America and leading teams, I would always say to the team that work-life balance is really important. Right. And I always noticed that however the boss's schedule is set up, so too flows the team. And so I'm an early bird, and I enjoy it. Don't judge me, but I start my day at 4 o'clock in the morning, right?
Wow.
And so I have to.
Look, no judgment here. In fact, that's admirable. So no judgment at all.
But I'll also share something on the other end. Okay. So I start my day early, but I share with my team that does not mean that you need to start your day early. You need to find a schedule that best works for you, but I have to articulate that to my team, because if I just expect for them to, just to not follow in my flow on their own, they won't, because they look to me as an example of what high performance looks like, right? And your team, they're looking to you as an example of how they should show up this season. And so the more transparent we are as leaders, being able to say, hey, well, my season looks a little different. I may not, this is what I'm doing, but I want you to begin thinking about what you should be doing as well too. And so, but I also share with them, I start my day at 4, but my day ends at 3. So so that's very important to me, that as a part of my self-care, that I can turn things off at 3 and I can switch into mommy mode, because I have a 3 and a 4-year-old, right? But a part of that grace is being able to say, okay, I'm trying to shut it off at 3, but my kids, I have some selfish kids.
They want mommy.
When your kids are 3 and 4, and I love it, and I say this very jokingly, but when your kids are 3 and 4, they care about them, and so it's so funny to watch, because when my kids come in the door, they are ready for food, and that grace that I have for myself is sometimes it may not be ready for them on time, right? And I have to be okay with that. There's nothing like a pandemic to really make you question your ability to parent your kids.
That is so true. That is so true. So your little ones are much younger than mine. I have a different set of challenges. I'm actually having to pry my kids out of their rooms to, engage, because I don't want them being so isolated just in their little bubble. I have an almost 20-year-old and then an 18-year-old. And so, the challenges are still there, but they look vastly different when they get older. So
yeah,
still
yeah.
hiring right now?
Say that again?
People still hiring right now. I think a lot of folks have even
Absolutely.
that. Is this even a time to look for a job, or should I just wait? But people are hiring now.
Yes. And so I've had some clients before that have said, hey, Jen, should I just hold on trying to look for a new job? And what I share with them is I first want you to understand and to acknowledge, is this a season where my skill set is in demand, right? So being able to answer that question first and acknowledge that for yourself first, and then saying, okay, well, my skill set is in demand this season, and now I'm going to answer the question, do I want to go and look for a job or not? Because there are many organizations that, yes, they are doing layoffs, yep, they are, furloughing their employees, but there are other industries that they're absolutely thriving in this season.
Right.
When you think about healthcare, when you think about the tech industry and industries of that nature, they're hiring in droves of people.
Yeah.
But another way to think about it too is that, think about Amazon, for instance. Yes, they're increasing their employee population by like 100,000 new employees. But when you bring on that many new employees, you have to also bring on the managers to lead them. You have to also bring on the people in finance and payroll, bring on the people in HR, so you have the groups that are in high demand, but that also feeds other groups that are in demand too. So I don't want anyone that's listening to this to instantly count yourself out just because we're in a pandemic. Answer the question first, are my skill sets in demand? And then decide if you want to pursue it or not.
Right.
But there was another piece of it that I was going to share as well too. Sometimes this is a good time to also, when you think about your role, ask yourself, how is my role and my experience valuable in context of this season? Right?
That's really
Sometimes
good.
Sometimes you have to remind people, and so I thought about this as I was talking to a group of D&I professionals, where in the beginning, everyone's talking about essential and non-essential workers.
Yes.
And you and we started this conversation. Actually, Nika, you made me think about this because
For those who've been on these calls, I take issue with people being referred to as essential and non-essential, and that's a whole nother conversation for a different day. But yes, I do. I take issue with that.
Yeah, you made me start thinking about it, and it hasn't left my system. I'm like, I'm just as upset as Nika.
I wish we can come up with some other ways to talk about, because I definitely get what they're trying to do, but those labels just created some angst for me that I just can't get over. But yeah.
Right, and so it starts to make you think that if someone else hasn't validated your title as essential, then you begin to count yourself out as non-essential. But sometimes, even if your title isn't in that essential checkbox, you have to be able to say, for instance, as a D&I leader, even my position is even more essential now. Look at all the conversations that are happening after the fact about, how, disproportionate treatment and outcomes of different communities, especially like the Black community too, had D&I leaders, said in the beginning, yes, this is essential, here's why it's essential. Sometimes you just have to remind people of the value that you actually bring to the team.
And I love the amplification of being able to think about your role and to pivot where necessary, and not because someone is telling you to, but taking that initiative, because that helps us to also make sure that our role is not disposable, right? We need to certainly make sure that we are being mindful of the current season. And I know that I always share that message with business owners, but I think the same applies to career professionals who are really just trying to secure their job, right? So I love that. I want to go back to something that you said earlier when you mentioned that you get up at 4 a.m. And again, no judgment. That is actually very admirable. So I can appreciate that. But I do think it's important for leaders right now to over-communicate, right, during this period of uncertainty. And so while you're communicating about, this is my schedule, I may get up at 4, I don't expect for you to follow that. I have found that I've had to do the same thing, and this is really even prior to COVID, around my email patterns. I have to work whenever I can get it in. And so because I'm sending you an email that could be literally maybe 1 a.m. in the morning, does not mean that I'm expecting you to respond to it then. That's just when I can get it in. But if I don't be communicative about that, it can cause so much stress on the person on the other end to feel like that they are expected to respond then. And right now, we have enough stresses of the world that people are dealing with to not have, some additional stresses. So I appreciate you bringing that to the fore.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And it's because a lot of what when I'm talking to people, the initial part of the conversation is, what do we have to shake off of you? What are those things that have been added to your thoughts about yourself?
Right.
And so when you think about things like performance reviews, and performance reviews are important, but there's so many pieces behind it that I share with people. You have to still take it with a grain of salt. Understand the essence of what someone's trying to tell you, but I don't ever want a person to walk away thinking that I'm less than, or I'm inferior, or I'm not good enough because of a performance review. And most of the time, that's where we have to start. We have to remind people of who they actually are and what they actually bring to the table, because someone's view of them and how they perform has made them feel otherwise.
Yeah.
Or because they're not performing the same way, their boss is performing, then it makes them feel inferior or less than themselves. And you carry your feelings about yourself on the job go with you into your everyday life too. And so, I take those conversations seriously.
And it works the opposite direction as well. What you're dealing with in your personal life also, you can't really separate that, especially not now when, the work life is blending, because people are literally finding that, like, I'm in my home office right now, but you're having to blend those two worlds in an even more, deliberate way than maybe prior to COVID. I have a theory, and I want to share it with this audience and then get you to respond to it, Jennifer. Then we're going to shift and look at some of the comments that's happening in the chat room. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat, or if you're joining us live on Facebook, put your comments in there. We do have a teammate that's going to make sure they make its way to the chat so we all can see it. But I theorize that as we continue, this is not going away anytime soon, this global pandemic. And so what I hope is going to happen is that those audiences that are part of those underserved communities, the most vulnerable, may, if employers are smart, may find themselves having greater options from an employment perspective, because when we think about working remotely, that opens up the opportunity for so many people, right? Transportation no longer is a big barrier. Maybe if I have some type of disability, it doesn't allow me to operate effectively in a face-to-face situation, but I can do that work just fine in the privacy of my home. So I'm hoping that we're going to see that people that are part of those most vulnerable populations will have greater employment opportunities. But again, a lot of that rests with the employers and their mindset. So just respond to that and let us know what your thoughts are.
You are absolutely spot on. And as a matter of fact, I was listening to another group of panelists talk about that. And prior to this pandemic, many organizations would say, no, you have to be here in person. There's no business case for you to work remotely. And there was always all of this tradition. This is the way that we've always done things. So I need to see you to know that you're performing well. But now through COVID, it's a game changer, where we're now showing that there's the technology to allow people to work remotely, that people can still be productive working remotely, that the actual issue is, again, the self-care, not overworking yourself while you're working remotely. So it opens up a lot. Yes, I know we're talking about underrepresented populations, but I do, to your point, want to emphasize even underserved populations. And so when you think about like even really rural areas and really small towns, it now opens up opportunities for those job seekers when jobs may not have been there, that they can now take on these new jobs as well too. So this could be great.
I did not consider that lens, and that is good. I have had a number of people that for whatever reason, they are not in a position to change, their geography, right? They have to stay planted. Maybe
Right.
it's an older family member that they're caring for or checking on. They're the only ones in that area. But it prevents them from seeking out opportunities that could be, you know, in a neighboring city that's maybe, I don't know, an hour away or whatever the case may be. So they're great talent, you know. And so I think that's a really good point. And I hope that employers are paying attention to those opportunities.
And you know, another group that this could be really good for are people with disabilities, people who are differently able that may not be able to physically go into an office.
Right.
This actually opens up a lot of opportunities for them as well, too.
No, I agree. This is such good conversation. So let's go to the chat because this is all about community, right? And I want to see what some questions are. So I see Angel has a question, and her question is, do you recommend putting an employer that you were terminated from during this season on your resume if you only worked there less than 2 months?
So there are a couple of pieces to this. And so, okay, so if you were terminated, but it was during the season and it was only 2 months, number one, if you were only in a job for 2 months, I wouldn't put it on my resume anyway. And so by not putting it on your resume, then you avoid the other questions as well, too. So there's more behind it, but for the sake of the time, it's only 2 months that you were at that job. It was during the pandemic. I wouldn't even bother putting it on there.
And you don't think that there's some potential consequences for having to answer the gap, the work gap?
So I don't know this full situation, but what I can say is things that employers don't question. So when you have gaps on your resume, and if you have a gap because, let's say, health reasons, or you had to take care of a loved one, or you decided to go back to school, there are certain factors that employers don't question. And so if any of those relate to your factor for having a gap on your resume in general, just lead with that and be short and concise and just leave it be. And employers aren't typically going to question, they shouldn't question it.
Yeah, and I'm hoping, again, going back to grace, I'm hoping that employers are extending a lot of grace, understanding that many people who are very well qualified have found themselves without a job, having nothing to do with them and their performance, but just the season that we're in. And Jocelyn Slaughter's on, and she's agreeing that, you know, it will at least need to go on the application, but maybe not necessarily the resume. So
correct.
That's advice as well.
Correct.
So question from Chanel Singletary, regarding references, is it recommended to put your current supervisor?
It depends. So many employers will ask you, is it okay if we contact your current supervisor? It is completely acceptable to say, no, it's not okay to contact my current supervisor. And what they'll do on the back end is they'll verify your employment in a different way. And so employers already know that it could cause some issue within your job if somebody else is calling your employer saying, hey, can you give us a reference for such and such because she's trying to come over here. So it's completely acceptable to say no, and they may ask for a different way to verify that you were employed there.
Yeah, no, good question. So here's a follow-up question to that, and this is the Nika question. I don't see this in the chat at all, but it just reminded me of this. So I remember, you know, years ago when I was, you know, in the job market during that season of my life, I had a prospective employer to ask me for what my current salary was, and I thought about that really hard, and I was resident to share that. And here's the reason why. I understand that a lot of women and a lot of people of color are already, you know, grossly underpaid, right? And so if they are going to take that information to try to gauge what they're going to offer to me, I'm already at a disadvantage. And so me being someone that is thoughtful about these issues of, you know, equity and inclusion, I made the decision to respectfully decline to share that information. And I'm just wondering your thoughts about that. You know, how do you coach people around situations where they're being asked to share their current salary information?
Great question. So one resource that I do want to provide is a website called equalpaytoday.org. So equalpaytoday.org. And on that website, it shows when our equal pay day happens. And so if my memory serves me correctly, because I was just looking at 2020, so if women are making 70 cents on the dollar for every man that's doing similar work, then I know last year the Equal Pay Day was in April, but then when you look at intersectionality, you begin thinking about, let's say, Black women, our Equal Pay Day is sometime in August. If you look at Latinas or Native American women, their Equal Pay Day is in October. Here's what this means. It means that we would have to work, in my instance, to do the same work, we would have to work all the way through into the next year, through August, to earn the same as generally what a male would earn doing the same work. Now, those statistics actually, when you break them down and you look at intersectionality, even among, when you look at races, even among men, there's also differences there as well too. So I wanted to point that out and check out equalpaytoday.org to see that. When people come to me and say, Jennifer, how do I answer this question? So if an employer were to ask me, what is your current salary? The way that I would respond is I would say, well, in doing some research, I've noticed that people doing this job typically earn da-da-da. I am fine with earning that. And so do you notice what I did? I heard their question where they said, what is your current salary? But I responded with my salary requirements based on the research that I've done. Now, you have some recruiters, because, I train them and I know how aggressive we can be as recruiters. They'll come back and say, well, I didn't ask you what your salary requirements were. What I'm asking you is what your current salary is. Then my response would be, I already know that I'm behind in my salary based on the work that I'm doing, which is why I was doing this research. And so I would repeat my salary requirements that way. Now, if at the end of the day they want to come back again and ask me for my current salary, I would just say what the salary requirement was. I wouldn't say that it was my salary requirement. I would use that same amount. I would say, here you go, and I would give it to them. And I've had conversations with leaders, managers, supervisors, leaders about this. There is no business need for you to know someone's current salary. Someone's current salary has nothing to do with what they should earn in that position, the worth of that position. And you'll have some managers say, well, it can tell you about their performance. You can learn about their performance in other ways. Right. Well, it can tell you about how assertive they are with making sure their salaries are right. But then that's when you know that there needs to be some more training by way of D&I with these managers, so that they can understand just, those obstacle courses to get to a good salary. Can I say something else about salary?
Of course.
While we're talking about it, because I love the conversation about salary. So people come to me and they'll sometimes say, hey, Jennifer, I believe that my worth is X. Like, this is the salary that I'm worth. And I'll clarify that it's not really about your worth. When it comes to your salary, it's about the worth of the position that you're going into. Right. So that position, how much are people doing this work in this industry generally earning? And if you find that salary is not enough for you, then here's where your worth comes in. You have to start looking for a different position. Maybe if the salary is too low for you, because maybe you've been doing the same work, for 15 years, and now the salary is too low for you when you look externally, that's an indicator that maybe you're looking too low of a level. Maybe you need to look at the next level. So there's your worth by way of what positions you choose, and then there's the worth of the position. So I have to split those conversations out for people when they're thinking about their own salary.
Really good, really insightful. Okay, so I want to go to the chat room because there's some questions and comments relevant to some of the commentary you just shared. So someone mentioned that it's illegal for prospective employers to ask about your salary history. I thought so too, but we need to get the memo out to the employers because I don't think that's pretty universal, which is kind of sad in some ways, because if it's illegal, you would think that those hiring managers and those recruiters are being trained to understand what they can and cannot ask. And so nonetheless.
And it's not illegal everywhere, right?
Oh, well, that's true too. It depends on where. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There are different states and, and communities within those states that they have their own, versions of that and what employers can and can't do. So some employers, especially those that have footprint across many states, some employers have decided to make, to make it a blanket response of, we're just not going to ask as a company.
I see. So Rachel Putman says, I think it's important that job seekers and our professionals remember that skills are often transferable. It's very true. I often encourage others to create stretch in his or her current role. It creates opportunities for exposure to others and to learn new skills. Really good input, Rachel. I hope you all are paying attention to what's happening in the chat room because there's some really good suggestions. People are nodding in terms of salary negotiations, a really difficult, complex conversation sometimes. It doesn't have to be, though, especially if you're kind of coached up, right, Jennifer?
That's right.
Let's see, what else is in here? It even asked on applications, the current salary slot can be seen at times. That's right, I do see that on applications a good bit. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Elvia Pacheco, because there's some comments and questions from our Facebook audience, and I want to make sure that we accommodate for their questions. I think Zoe Klinkskell specifically had a question. So Elvia, would you like to unmute yourself and address that question, please?
Yeah, so Zoe's question was around opportunities as far as job opportunities that are available due to the COVID situation and how best we can share those.
So there's a person on LinkedIn that I follow, and his name is Andrew Seaman, S-E-A-M-A-N. I think that's how you spell his last name. I think it's M-A-N. And so his whole job, if you follow the hashtag #GetHired, he writes articles all the time about companies that are hiring right now. And he keeps this long list, and it stays updated on a regular basis. And so I'm following him in particular because he's talking to recruiters all over. So he works for LinkedIn as a journalist for LinkedIn. And so he has access to send emails to recruiters all over the country. And he asks them questions about their companies and how many positions they're filling. So I like his list. So if you go to him, and if you connect to me on LinkedIn as well, I'll make sure that I do a post of what I'm talking about related to Andrew Seaman. But I'm really happy about his work. And every Friday at I think it's 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, he does a go live where he brings on different people, whether it's recruiters and career coaches and things, to talk about the openings that are out there. So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, that's great. Tremendous resource. And I did put it into the chat. Andrew Seaman, S-E-A-M-A-N, #GetHired. So check that out if you're in the job market right now. So Jocelyn's question, I would envision that XYZ organization would fairly compensate me based on my experience and industry best practices. How does that sound? Yeah, we all would hope that people would be, fair, right? And extending compensations, but yeah.
So that's the thing. You're right, Nika. We would hope that we would walk into an interview and they would say, oh, I'm going to be absolutely fair to this person, and I'm going to make sure that they get what they're owed for this position. Here's my response to that. As hard as this sounds, companies are not their job is not to make you rich. Their job is to protect the profits of the organization. And one of the biggest cost factors of an organization are the people that they hire. And so if they can make sure that that overall cost is managed and it's exactly where it should be to get the right talent, they're not going to be thinking about making you rich. You are responsible for owning that. You are responsible for doing your own research to see what your peers are making, doing the same work, so that you can go in and when you're having that conversation, you're not having it saying, hey, here's what I think I should earn. Nope, you're saying, here's based on my research, here's what people earn doing the same work out there.
Right.
Same thing when you're trying to get a raise within your organization. So all of that personal stuff, it doesn't have an effect on the employers anymore. You actually have to go in with data, being able to say, and I always say it this way, like, I love working here. I love my job, but my fear, my concern is that by staying here in this position, I'm going to fall behind in salary based on what my peers are making in the market. What would you do if you were me? And then use your manager as a thought partner and see what they say. Like, what would you do if you were me? And so, but you go in with the data to support your conversation.
Yeah.
But make sure they know you like what you do and you really don't want to go.
Right.
If that's the case for you.
Do your research. That's important. So to go back on what Jocelyn was stating in terms of, we all would like to think that the organizations that we are applying to work for are going to be fair in their compensation, but and leverage industry best practices. That doesn't always be the case, but it can be a stalling tactic for you to say to them, I would envision that you, as a great reputable brand that's brought me here today, as someone interested in being a part of your organization, that I would be compensated fairly based on my experience and industry best practices. And it's almost like you're setting that expectation for do the right thing, and whether or not they do the right thing is, remains to be seen after that day, but at least you are allowing them to know that you're thoughtful about what you subject yourself to, what you say yes and what you say no to. And I think that can bode well for the individual job seeker.
That's true. Very, very true. And to your point, that's exactly what I'm trying to teach recruiters through diversity training, that if you can begin to create fair offers, you don't put people in a place of having to negotiate, and not everyone feels comfortable or has the right mentors or has access to the right mentors to help to get them ready for negotiation conversation. That's another way we get behind as well too.
Absolutely. So we have roughly 9 minutes left, and I want to open up the line for anyone who would like to unmute themselves to engage with you directly, maybe on some questions that they have. It could be relevant to this topic that we're currently dealing with, or maybe it's something else under this broad umbrella of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'll pause here to give anyone who wishes an opportunity to unmute themselves and present their question.
Hey, Jennifer.
Hello.
Thank you so much for sharing today. I just added you on LinkedIn. My question is, there was a blurb you were saying, and I was trying to remember it and write it down, but I think it would be very helpful, if not for me to pass along to a colleague in this hour. And it started with, I love what I do here, but my fear, that whole thing. I need that again, please.
Yeah, no, okay. I love my job and what I do here, but my concern is that staying in this position will cause me to fall behind my peers doing the same work. So fall behind, with salary compared to my peers doing the same work in this industry. And that's a very different conversation than saying, hey, I think I deserve more. Everybody deserves more.
Yeah. And and how many employers or managers, supervisors have we ever encountered that have this position of, this person is so good in their job to where they don't even want to consider them for something else, and that pigeonholes that individual, and it's so unfair, And so I think there's something to be said for making sure that if we are managers, directors, of people that fall under our report, that we are very intentional about allowing them to grow and propel themselves to the next level, no matter how good they are at what they're currently doing,
That's right. And another manager to be aware of, or even to be weary of, is the manager that is very complacent with their own pay, their title, their position, because if they're complacent, they're going to try to either talk you into being complacent with yours, or they're going to try to say to you that you should be happy that you still have this job. Like, you should be fortunate, right? And so again, that's that human element. You have to be responsible for your own career. I actually had a conversation yesterday with a woman who, she accepted a new offer, and she was about to, so she was so afraid to tell her boss that she accepted a new offer because she's so loyal. And I loved it. I mean, it was to the point where she was in tears that she didn't want to disappoint her boss. But I had to remind her, that this is all life, and this is your life, and the decisions that you make for yourself and the courageous conversations that you choose to have can better set up you and your family. And so you have to be able to prioritize what's important to you and your own goals and mission in life.
Yeah, and what came to mind for me as you shared that story, I don't know if this person was a person of color that received that feedback, but whenever I hear someone of color share that their employer has made some mention of, you should be happy that you have this job, I see that as a direct microaggression. And let me tell you, there's nothing micro about that type of aggression, right?
I agree.
And so that then, of course, conjures up all these other additional thoughts and coaching opportunities and I think there are a subset of people, unfortunately, that do perceive, the workforce in that regard. You should be happy that you have this job. And so just, continue to do what you're doing and stay quiet. And, as we've talked before in today's conversation, sometimes it's not enough for us to just come in, do our job well. We have to also self-advocate and to make sure that we are being communicative about what we want for our career progression, what we're interested in. The question of how do you get what you want from a career perspective is you first have to know what you want and be willing and bold enough to ask for it, right? So
anyway. And to take that conversation a step further, you have to ask a person who can do something about it, right? So it's not even just about asking. We tend to ask. We tend to vent to people who can do nothing about it. Or sometimes we think that all we need to do is talk to our manager. But if they can't do anything about it, sometimes you have to have that conversation with their manager. And you have to be courageous enough to do that.
Yeah, one of the things that I always coach mentors around, especially when they're new in their positions, is within that first, 30 to 60 days, you need to make sure that you're asking for a copy of the performance evaluation. What am I being evaluated on? Ask questions about, the culture of the organization. Ask questions about, especially if you're a person of color, their leadership around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And really, some of those questions should occur even before you accept the job. But definitely. So I think that what you mentioned before in terms of amplifying the fact of the control and being in the driver's seat on the job seeker's end, that is really important. We can't necessarily allow others to take our fate into their own hands and create those opportunities for us. We have to make sure that we're doing our part as well. So Anne would like to add something. So Anne, please feel free to unmute yourself and join the conversation.
Thank you. So this question might be split for both of you, but I'd love to know, I'm working with an organization now that, is doing a full-on D&I overview, and there's so many different ways to tackle it, of course, and there's lots of different patterns that we always see, but I think all the way to, the recruitment side that you're talking about and the hiring side, Jennifer, and then of course, Nika, I know you do like the full-on piece as well. What are some of the places that you feel specifically, I'm interested in policy, that you feel is really important to get right to ensure equity in all of the levels, but specifically when you get down to hiring, recruitment, and when you're sitting across the table, and especially in rubric making in particular?
A great question, Anne. Jennifer, would you like to lead in on that?
Okay, so it's so funny because I'm knee deep in talking about this stuff right now with something else that I'm working on. So I'm just going to talk about my world of hiring. And I'm going to go all the way to the end and talk about making the selection decision. One of the biggest issues around getting to fair selection decisions is number one, that hiring managers aren't always required to give feedback on why they said yes or no. So that should absolutely be a requirement to give feedback. But even more specifically, it needs to be usable, valuable feedback. It can't just be this high-level feedback of, I don't think that they're a good fit. Okay, why aren't they a good fit? Or even more specifically, explain to me which of the minimum qualifications they do or don't connect to, right? Or if someone is saying what cultural fit, if someone's saying that's not a good cultural fit, okay, so cultural fit is so vague. Let's talk about what it means to fit in our culture here, and what, you know, so that's one piece of it, the feedback. But the other piece of it is making sure that all of your hiring managers are trained on how to make a fair selection, right? Do they understand what questions should be asked, and that all of the questions should be similar across all the candidates? Do they understand what a great answer looks like versus a mediocre answer versus a bad answer? Do they also understand how some of their own unconscious biases could get in the way and distract them? And more importantly, do they understand that their gut feeling on a candidate isn't the best way to select a person? So like that's just that one small part of the hiring process, but I'll stop there because there's so much throughout the whole hiring system.
Yeah, this is actually a really great question, and it's quite loaded. I'll just add on to what Jennifer said by amplifying the need to normalize conversations of inequities. I think that is probably the biggest things that organizations can do to make part of their culture and their process. We have to provide teammates and leaders with tools to have those tough conversations. That's really critical. And if we do that, we help normalize the conversation around issues of inequities and bias. And then that helps to create greater parity. It helps to create greater sense of belonging and valuing, particularly among those who are part of those underserved communities. And the last thing that I'll say by way of policy, because again, I think that when we talk about really trying to institute change, it's not about activity, it's about impact, right? And so we need to think about changing systems, culture, procedures, policies, not just having a separate initiative or a program with a start and an end date, but let's really go deep and sustain the work. And what that looks like oftentimes is just having this rule and this expectation across the board where you just keep asking these strategic D&I questions at every point to ensure that you are reaching and including the most vulnerable, and that you are addressing the needs of the marginalized, workforce population. And I think that in and of itself helps organizations to leverage a framework for analyzing the way decisions are being made. And hopefully in analyzing it, they're able to see where there are gaps, where perhaps people aren't operating with the lens of equity and inclusion as they should be. And then call I don't want to say out, but call that in, call that behavior in so that we can correct it going forward. I hope that answers your question, Anne. Okay, so these hours, they always go by so fast, but I will tell you, we do have a couple questions in the chat. And so what I have been doing when the conversation is just really too great to just abruptly end, I have been adding on another 10 minutes, but going ahead and adjourning for the sake of those who have only an hour allotted. So I want to thank each of you for joining us for Intentional Conversations, our virtual community chat. And I want to thank our guest, Jennifer Tardy. You all have been a tremendous audience in asking questions, really smart questions, and I hope that you will continue to ask these questions and pursue knowledge. I think it's going to make us all better around this topic and even other topics that we are finding surfacing right now during this COVID-19 period. Join us again next week at the same time. We're going to have Minda Hartz, the author of the memo, How Women of Color Can Secure Their Seats. And I will tell you, we've had a lot of conversations today about salary negotiations. She has a whole chapter that deals with that, and it's so rich. And so I'm hoping that you all are going to join the book club as well as join the conversation next week. Thank you to our Facebook audience as well. With that said, I will officially end our hour, but if you want to stick around, we're going to take maybe another 10 minutes just to make sure we wrap up some of these additional questions that have already been presented, okay? Jennifer, any parting remarks?
I'm just very excited to have been here today. This has been a great conversation, and if anyone is looking for me, you already know, just go to jennifertardy.com.
Yep, absolutely.
And good luck to you all.
And you have a resource that I know that we did put into our last communication to all those who registered, but when we end in just a second, I'm going to have you talk about that, and then we'll take these last questions, okay? But for those that have to jump off, thanks so much. Have a great weekend. Okay, so share with us that resource, then we'll take the other questions, Jennifer.
Okay, so I have, there's a guide that I have out there. I have a lot of guides, but this one in particular. It's 21 pieces of career advice for underrepresented populations. And so whenever I'm talking about underrepresented populations, I'm talking about women, people of color, veterans, people who identify as LGBTQ+, I'm talking about the differently able populations like that. And so advice I wish someone would have shared with me as I was on my job search.
That is awesome. And I know that we have that link. I'm going to have one of my colleagues to actually put that into the chat feature so that people can have access to that in case you missed it in the email that went out ahead of time. Okay, so let me go back to some of the questions. A lot of these are just folks thanking us for good discussion. Thank you, Terry. Appreciate your commentary there. Thank you, Jocelyn. So Marello King, how can a person get out of a position with a pay grade that is too low, but they took the job so they would not continue to be unemployed and devoid of health care? That's a great question. So once you've already in that job, you've taken the job because you had to. Now
to get your foot in the door.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're working to get your foot in the door. So you took a job that was below your pay grade. So now it's time to start doing some networking. And so number one, to your point earlier, Nika, what do you want next? What is more aligned to something that you want? Being able to answer that question for yourself. Can you find it within the company? If yes, then my next advice for you is to go and talk to someone in that department. If you are courageous enough, have a conversation or a chat with the head of the department. I am a huge fan of going straight to the top. And then being able to just say, I'd love to learn more about this department. So maybe if positions become available in the future, I could be considered. But those are the conversations you should have before the position ever even gets posted. Just get to know the people in the department.
Good advice. Okay, another question from the chat. How can you spot a toxic microaggression environment before you accept an offer?
Yeah, so when my clients say to me, hey, I want to make sure that I go and work in a good environment, I always say, let's unpack that. What is a good environment to you? What are 3 things that make up the type of environment that you want to see? So with this question, I'd flip that. I'd say, what is a toxic environment to you? Because it's very different for everyone. And what are the top 3 things that you know that you have 0 tolerance for? And then when you're in the middle of the interview, begin asking questions around those things. So a lot of times, people will ask, like if I'm the job seeker and I'm in an interview, oftentimes will ask a very generic question like, what is the environment like here? But that's not what you're really trying to figure out. You want to make sure that people aren't backstabbing each other, for an example. Maybe that's what toxicity looks like to you. And then you ask a question similar that gets to that answer. Are people backstabbing each other around here? But obviously you do it in a very professional way.
Right.
So you ask those questions during the interview.
No, that's really good. I think those were the only 2 lingering questions. I will just do one last call for anyone who would like to unmute themselves to ask their question directly. Now is your chance before we wrap up today. Some really good questions. Anyone going once, going twice? Okay, well, I think that we have reached our time, and I am glad that all hearts and minds are satisfied with the questions. That means that we can let you go, but we are so appreciative of you taking time to join with us today, Jennifer. You have shared some wonderful nuggets, and I'm so glad that our paths crossed years ago and that we've remained in touch. I look forward to continuing to support you in your work, and the fact that you decided to accept my invitation allows me to feel seen, valued, and heard, and so I appreciate that, and I just want to thank you so very much. We will make sure that all of your contact information is available for our audience today. And any parting remarks that you would like to share?
Just always remember what they tell you on an airplane to protect yourself first before you try to save somebody else. And so self-care is key, especially in this season. Don't forget about yourself.
Absolutely, self-care is key. Well, thank you so very much. Everyone have a great weekend. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.